I am Paige Harper, 18 years old, and I have spent the last 6 weeks drinking every meal through a straw. My jaw still aches where the metal wires held the broken pieces together. Dad always said my mouth would get me in trouble. That night when my college acceptance letter arrived, it finally did. His fist connected with my face as Mom laughed from the doorway. "Maybe now you will learn to keep that gutter mouth shut," he snarled. What they never saw coming was my smile behind the pain. Before I tell you how I turned my pain into power drop, a comment letting me know where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to rebuild yourself from broken pieces. My early childhood memories are like faded photographs with torn edges. There were good times once. I remember Dad teaching me to ride a bike when I was 5, his strong hands steady on the seat as I pedaled forward. Mom baking chocolate chip cookies on Sunday afternoons, letting me lick the spoon. Family camping trips where we would roast marshmallows and Dad would tell ghost stories that made me squeal with delighted terror. But those memories grew dimmer as I got older. By the time I turned 10, Dad had been laid off from his management position and took a job in construction. The physical labor hardened his body and his temperament. He started drinking more. First just on weekends, then Thursday nights, then whenever he felt like it. The man who once patiently taught me to bait a fishing hook became someone who would throw a plate against the wall if his dinner was cold. Brian Harper was respected in our small Midwest town. 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and a firm handshake, he coached Little League and volunteered for community cleanup days. Nobody saw how his smile disappeared when our front door closed, or how his voice became a low, dangerous rumble when I asked for school supplies or lunch money. Mom changed too. Stephanie Harper had once been warm and attentive, but she slowly transformed into a hollow version of herself. She learned to anticipate Dad's moods, to move silently through the house during his Sunday football games, to look away when his hand raised in my direction. Sometimes I caught her watching me with an odd expression, something between resentment and competition. As I grew into my teenage years, her comments became sharper, more cutting. "Look at you," she would say, eyeing my thrift store jeans, trying to dress like those popular girls. "Who do you think you are fooling?" I learned to make myself small in my own home. I kept my grades high, but never mentioned academic achievements. When I won a district art competition in 9th grade, I hid the certificate in my underwear drawer. Achievements made Dad angry, as though my success somehow diminished him. Our household finances were always tight. Dad brought home decent money from construction, but his drinking, gambling, and occasional splurges on new hunting gear meant we were always behind on something. The electricity was shut off twice last winter. I started babysitting at 14, then waitressing at 16, but Dad took half of every paycheck for room and board. The rest I hid in a hollowed-out copy of Jane Eyre, saving for some undefined future escape. I had friends at school, but I kept them at arm's length. Zoe Williams tried countless times to get me to open up, bringing me coffee and sitting beside me in the art room during lunch. Derek Johnson, whose locker was next to mine since freshman year, noticed the bruise on my wrist last spring and asked if everything was okay at home. I became an expert at deflection, at crafting believable stories about clumsiness, at changing the subject with a smile that never reached my eyes. My journal became my only confidant. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard under my bed, its pages held the truths I could never speak aloud. I documented every insult, every shove, every drunken tirade. Some deeply buried survival instinct told me that someday these records might matter. As senior year progressed, the tension in our house grew thicker. College brochures that arrived in the mail mysteriously disappeared. When I mentioned scholarships, Dad would grunt and change the subject. Mom was more direct. "College is for rich kids and snobs," she said once while folding laundry. "People like us work for a living." But secretly, I had been applying anyway. The school counselor, Mrs. Thompson, helped me get fee waivers for applications and guided me through financial aid forms. I used the school computer lab during lunch periods, carefully erasing my browsing history afterward. I applied to 7 schools, all at least 200 miles away. Distance was my primary criteria. The weeks leading up to graduation were a minefield. Dad's construction company was laying people off, and he came home later each night smelling of whiskey and radiating a dangerous energy. Mom grew more distant, spending evenings on the phone with her sister, complaining about me as though I was not sitting 10 feet away. The house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the uneasy silence. I just needed to make it until August. My acceptance letters were sent to Zoe's address. My graduation money was hidden in my locker at school. I had a plan. All I had to do was stay invisible for a few more months. But invisible is hard to maintain when your future arrives in the mail. The letter came on a Friday in early April. I had been checking the mail obsessively for weeks, racing home from school to intercept anything addressed to me. That day, the thick envelope from Northern State University was wedged between the electric bill and a furniture store flyer. My hands trembled as I pulled it from the box. The weight of it told me everything I needed to know before I even tore it open. My parents were at a neighborhood barbecue, which gave me 2 hours of precious solitude. I sat cross-legged on my bed and carefully opened the envelope. The acceptance letter was printed on heavy cream paper with an embossed university seal at the top. But it was the second page that made my heart stutter. A full academic scholarship. Books, tuition, and housing covered for 4 years. I pressed the letter to my chest and allowed myself a moment of pure, unfettered joy. In that moment, I saw a different life unfolding before me. Dormitory rooms with friendly roommates. Professors who valued my opinions. A future where I could speak without flinching. So caught up was I in this fantasy that I did not hear the front door open, did not register the heavy footsteps on the stairs, did not have time to hide the evidence of my betrayal before my bedroom door swung open. They were both drunk. Dad's eyes were bloodshot, his movements exaggerated. Mom swayed slightly in the doorway behind him, her lipstick smeared at one corner. "What is that?" Dad asked, his voice deceptively soft. I should have lied. Should have said it was a rejection letter. Should have apologized immediately. But some long, dormant spark of defiance flared in my chest. "I got accepted to Northern State," I said, my voice steady despite the fear curling in my stomach. Full scholarship. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Dad laughed, a harsh barking sound with no humor in it. "You applied to college." Behind our backs, his voice rose with each word. "After everything we have done for you, I deserve a future too," I said quietly. "I worked hard for this." His face changed, then something dark and terrible washing over his features. Mom must have seen it too, because she stepped forward, but not to protect me. Instead, she snatched the letter from my hands. "Who do you think you are?" she hissed. "Too good for us now. Going to go off and become some educated snob while your father breaks his back to keep this roof over your head." "The scholarship covers everything," I tried to explain. "You would not have to pay anything. I could help out during summers, send money home when I can." Dad's hand shot out so fast I did not see it coming. His open palm connected with my cheek, snapping my head back. This was familiar territory, something I had learned to endure. But what came next was not. As I staggered backward, his fist followed. Knuckles connected with the side of my jaw. I heard a sickening crack, felt something give way. The pain was immediate and blinding. I collapsed onto the floor, blood filling my mouth. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard Mom laugh, a high, brittle sound. "That is what you get for being useless," she said, "for thinking you are better than us." Dad stood over me, breathing heavily. "Maybe now you will learn to keep that gutter mouth shut." I could not respond if I wanted to. The pain was too intense, radiating from my jaw through my entire skull. I tasted blood and something else, something wrong. Later, I would learn it was bone fragments. What happened next saved me, though I did not know it at the time. Our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Winters, had heard the commotion through the thin walls of our duplex. She called 911, reporting a domestic disturbance. Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance. Dad heard them too. He grabbed my upper arm, hauling me to my feet. "You fell down the stairs," he growled. "You understand me. You tripped and fell." The room spun around me. I could not hold myself upright. Mom moved quickly, then wiping blood from my face with a tissue, smoothing my hair. "Such a clumsy girl," she said, loudly, as footsteps approached our front door, always rushing around. The police officers who arrived were professional, but not particularly suspicious. They had been to our house before for noise complaints, and Dad was always respectful, apologetic. This time was no different. He explained how his daughter had tripped coming up the stairs, how teenagers were always in such a hurry. I could not speak to contradict him. Could barely remain conscious as they helped me to the patrol car, then to the emergency room. The world had narrowed to pulses of agony with each heartbeat. The hospital was a blur of bright lights and concerned faces. X-rays confirmed what I already knew. My jaw was broken in 2 places. I would need surgery to wire it shut while it healed. A young female doctor asked to speak with me alone. She leaned close, her voice gentle. "Did someone do this to you?" she asked. "You can tell me the truth. We can help you." I stared at her, tears sliding silently down my face. I wanted to tell her everything. About the years of casual cruelty, about the scholarship letter, about Mom's laughter. But Dad's warning echoed in my head. And beneath the fear was a deeper understanding: if I spoke now without a plan, things would only get worse. So, I shook my head and pointed to the stairs with my free hand. The doctor's eyes showed her disbelief, but she did not push further. The surgery happened that night. I woke up with my jaw immobilized, metal wires holding the broken pieces in place. The doctor explained I would need to keep it wired for 6 weeks. No solid food, no talking. Complete dependence. Dad was solicitous in front of the medical staff, asking detailed questions about my care, nodding seriously at their instructions. Mom gathered my prescriptions from the pharmacy, her face a mask of maternal concern. The drive home was silent. As we pulled into the driveway, Dad turned to look at me in the back seat. "This stays in the family," he said quietly. "What happens in this house is nobody's business but ours. Remember that." I nodded, slightly careful not to disturb the fresh surgical sites. But inside, something had shifted. The pain had crystallized. My thoughts burned away my uncertainty. In the sterile hospital room, with my mouth literally wired shut, I had finally heard my own voice clearly for the first time. I was done being silent. The first week of recovery was a special kind of hell. Pain radiated from my jaw into my neck, my temples, behind my eyes. The prescription painkillers made me nauseated, but not taking them was worse. Every 4 hours, Mom would silently hand me my medication and a glass of water, then walk away without checking if I managed to swallow them. I dropped 2 pills on the first day, watching them roll under my bed, unable to bend down to retrieve them without waves of dizziness. Eating became a torturous exercise. Everything had to be liquefied and consumed through a straw. The nutritional supplements the hospital provided tasted like chalky chemicals. When I tried to make a smoothie, Dad complained about the blender noise. By day 3, I had lost 5 pounds. By day 7, my clothes hung loose on my frame. The isolation was almost worse than the pain. Dad went back to work. Mom resumed her daily routines, and I was left alone in my room, unable to speak, to call out, to ask for help. My phone had mysteriously disappeared during the hospital visit, and the home computer was in the living room where I rarely ventured. I existed in a bubble of silence and pain. On the 9th day, when my parents were both out, I managed to check the mail. Among the bills and advertisements was a letter from Northern State University. With trembling hands, I opened it. The scholarship committee needed to conduct a phone interview by the end of the month, just 2 weeks away. If they could not reach me, the scholarship would go to an alternate candidate. I sat on the front step, the paper crumpling in my grip, and felt something inside me start to cave. This had been my one chance, my escape route, and it was slipping away while I sat imprisoned in my own broken body. For the first time since the incident, I allowed myself to cry, silent tears streaming down my face. That night, unable to sleep, I reached under my mattress for my journal, needing the comfort of pouring my thoughts onto paper if I could not speak them. Instead, my fingers touched the edge of an older notebook, one I had filled the previous year. I pulled it out, flipping through pages by the dim light of the street lamp outside my window. Entry after entry documented the slow escalation of abuse. A slap for talking during Dad's favorite television show. Mom accidentally pouring hot coffee on my homework. Dad throwing my art supplies in the trash because drawing would not pay bills. The words blurred before my eyes, not from tears this time, but from a growing clarity. This pattern would never end. If I somehow recovered, somehow salvaged my scholarship, somehow made it to college, they would find ways to sabotage me. Dad would show up drunk at my dorm. Mom would call with fabricated emergencies. They would drain me emotionally and financially until I had no choice but to return home defeated. Then they would say they had been right all along, unless I broke the cycle completely. The next day, I walked the 8 blocks to the public library, moving slowly, keeping my hood up to avoid attention. At a computer terminal in the back corner, I researched domestic abuse resources. The screen filled with hotline numbers, emergency shelters, legal aid organizations. I created a new email account and joined an anonymous support forum for abuse survivors. That was where I first encountered Sarah's story. She had escaped an abusive husband after 5 years, rebuilt her life, and now volunteered helping others do the same. I sent her a private message, keeping details vague, asking for advice. To my surprise, she responded within hours. Document everything she wrote, even retrospectively, dates, times, specific events. Take photos of injuries. Record conversations if it's safe and legal in your state. Build your case quietly while planning your exit. And remember, you deserve safety and peace. This is not your fault. The local library became my sanctuary. I spent hours there every day while my parents were at work researching and planning. I learned about restraining orders and victim advocacy programs. I discovered that my state had mandatory arrest laws for domestic violence when there was visible injury. I read about the cycle of abuse, the psychology of enablers like my mother, the statistics about victims who return to their abusers. Knowledge became power, transforming my despair into determination. I started a new journal, this one, hidden in a zippered compartment of my backpack that went everywhere with me. In it, I meticulously recorded everything I could remember from the past decade, creating a timeline of escalating abuse. With a disposable camera purchased from the dollar store, I documented my healing jaw from multiple angles, dating each photograph. I recorded my parents' conversations using a small tape recorder I found in a box of my old school supplies, capturing Dad's casual threats and Mom's enabling commentary. 2 weeks into my recovery, I received a second letter from the university. The scholarship deadline had been extended due to technical difficulties on their end. I would have until the end of May to complete the interview. It felt like the first piece of good luck in a very long time, a sign that perhaps the universe was not entirely against me. That same day in the library bathroom, I carefully removed one of the rubber bands holding my jaw wires in place, just enough to be able to whisper. I used the library phone to call the domestic violence hotline. The woman who answered had a gentle voice that immediately made me tear up. "I need help," I whispered, "but I have to be smart about it." She connected me with a local advocate named Julia, who agreed to meet me at the library the following day. Julia was in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She did not gasp or offer empty platitudes when I showed her the photos of my jaw. Instead, she pulled out a notepad and started making lists. "You are right to be cautious," she said. "The most dangerous time for someone in your situation is when they try to leave. But you have got advantages many do not. You are legally an adult. You have documented evidence, and you have a legitimate reason to leave home for college." Together, we developed a strategy. I would continue to appear compliant at home, the perfect injured daughter, while systematically preparing for my departure. Julia connected me with the school counselor, Mrs. Thompson, who helped me apply for a replacement ID and social security card, sending them to her office rather than my home. With Julia's guidance, I opened a bank account at a credit union across town, one my parents had never used. I arranged for my final paycheck from the diner where I had worked to be deposited directly. It was not much, but it was something. Most importantly, I filed an application for a temporary restraining order to be processed, but not served until I was safely away from home. Julia explained that this would create a legal record of my allegations, but would not alert my parents until I was ready. As April turned to May, my physical strength gradually returned. The pain in my jaw subsided to a dull ache. I gained back some of the weight I had lost. But I maintained the appearance of weakness, of submission at home. I nodded meekly when Dad barked orders. I kept my eyes downcast when Mom made snide comments about my appearance. All the while, I was gathering my resources, strengthening my resolve, and preparing for the moment when I would reclaim my life. The despair that had nearly consumed me was replaced by a cold, clear purpose. I would not just survive this. I would ensure they never hurt anyone this way again. By early May, I had developed a comprehensive escape plan with a precise timeline. The jaw wires would come off on May 20th. My parents had mentioned a weekend trip to visit Dad's brother in June, giving me the perfect opportunity to execute my plan while they were away. Graduation was scheduled for June 15th, and I intended to be long gone before then settled somewhere safe where I could conduct my scholarship interview and secure my future. Each element of my plan required careful preparation. First were the documents: birth certificate, social security card, high school transcripts, medical records. Some I already had hidden in my room. Others required creativity to obtain. I told Mom I needed my birth certificate for graduation verification, which she reluctantly retrieved from their filing cabinet. When she was in the shower, I made a photocopy at the ancient machine in Dad's home office, returning the original before she noticed. Money was the next critical component. The diner where I had worked agreed to hold my position until I was healed, but I needed funds immediately. Mrs. Thompson, now fully aware of my situation, connected me with a weekend filing job at the school district office. The position was perfect, 4 hours each Saturday morning when Dad was usually fishing and Mom visited her sister. The pay was deposited directly into my new account, invisible to my parents. Legal preparation was perhaps the most critical aspect. Julia, my advocate, introduced me to a pro bono attorney named Marjorie Lewis, who specialized in domestic violence cases. In her small office decorated with children's artwork and legal diplomas, I laid out my evidence. The journal entries, the photographs, the secret recordings. "This is more documentation than most of my clients have," Marjorie said, reviewing my materials. "You have been very thorough, Paige." Together we prepared affidavits and formal statements. Marjorie explained exactly what would happen when I filed for the protective order, how the police would serve my parents, what to expect at the hearing. She also helped me understand the criminal charges that could be filed. "Your father committed felony assault," she explained. "The fact that you are his child actually makes the penalties more severe. Your mother's role is more complicated legally, but she could face charges as an accessory." The possibility of my parents facing jail time stirred complicated emotions. Despite everything, some small part of me still remembered the father who had taught me to ride a bike, the mother who had once bandaged my scraped knees. But then I would touch the still tender spot along my jawline and remember the sound of Mom's laughter as I lay bleeding on the floor. Physical preparation became an unexpected source of strength. The hospital had provided a sheet of exercises to maintain muscle tone while my jaw healed. I expanded these into a simple workout routine I could do silently in my room. Push-ups against the wall, squats while brushing my teeth, stretches during the long hours alone. My body, which had felt so betrayed and broken, slowly began to respond, becoming stronger, more capable. As I worked to strengthen my body, I also fortified my support network. I reconnected with Zoe, sending her a carefully worded email from my library computer. Without revealing everything, I explained that I was in a difficult situation at home and would need her help soon. Her response was immediate and unquestioning. "Whatever you need, whenever you need it. I am here," she wrote back. Derek, too, became part of my carefully constructed safety net. He had access to his family's second car and offered to be on call when my moment came. These tentative reaches outward, these small acts of trust, were perhaps the most terrifying part of my preparation. Each person I told became both a potential lifeline and a potential risk. Julia helped me connect with a domestic violence shelter in a neighboring county, where I could stay temporarily after leaving home. The location was confidential, the security protocols stringent. They had a 2-week maximum stay policy, but it would be enough time to secure more permanent arrangements. While my external preparations progressed, I maintained a careful facade at home. I adopted a new demeanor, one of quiet compliance. I nodded at appropriate intervals during Dad's dinner table monologues. I helped Mom with household chores without being asked. I kept my gaze lowered, my posture submissive. This apparent defeat seemed to satisfy them. Dad's watchfulness relaxed slightly. He started staying out later again, coming home with the familiar smell of whiskey clinging to his clothes. Mom resumed her phone conversations with friends, complaining about her ungrateful daughter who had caused such a scene with her clumsiness. Their growing complacency was precisely what I needed. Each time Dad left his wallet unattended on the counter, I photographed his driver's license and credit cards information Marjorie had advised might be useful in legal proceedings. When Mom stepped outside to smoke, I quickly scanned important mail, building a picture of their finances and obligations that might become relevant later. One evening in late May, after my jaw wires had been removed and I could speak again, Dad made a comment about the cost of my medical care, implying I had orchestrated my injury for attention. "You always were an expensive kid," he said, not looking up from his newspaper. "Never satisfied with what we gave you." In the past, I would have apologized or slipped quietly from the room or absorbed the words like body blows. This time, I simply watched him studying the man who had terrorized me for so long. He seemed smaller, somehow less imposing. His power over me was already diminishing, though he did not know it yet. "I am grateful for everything you have done," I said softly, the words feeling strange in my newly liberated mouth. The lie came easily, a small deception in service of a greater truth to come. Dad looked up, surprised by my response. For a moment, something like confusion crossed his face. Then he grunted and returned to his paper. The moment passed, but it confirmed what I had begun to suspect. They had grown so accustomed to my fear that they no longer recognized its absence. As June approached, the final pieces of my plan fell into place. My bank account contained just over $800. My emergency bag was packed and hidden at Zoe's house, containing clothes, toiletries, copies of important documents, and a prepaid phone Julia had provided. The restraining order paperwork was completed, ready to be filed. The shelter had confirmed space would be available. Dad announced they would be visiting Uncle Frank on the second weekend of June, leaving Friday morning and returning Sunday evening. Mom complained about the timing so close to graduation, but Dad had already requested the days off work and would not be dissuaded. On the Wednesday before their trip, I sat at the dinner table, pushing food around my plate as they discussed their travel plans. Mom was worried about leaving me alone, not out of concern for my welfare, but fear that I might get into trouble without supervision. "She will be fine," Dad said dismissively. "Not like she has anywhere to go or anyone who wants her around." The casual cruelty of his words would once have devastated me. Now they merely strengthened my resolve. In less than 72 hours, I would prove him wrong on all counts. That night, I lay awake in bed, reviewing each step of my plan, anticipating potential complications, rehearsing responses. Fear and doubt crept in, as they always did in the darkness. What if I failed? What if they discovered my preparations? What if after everything I was not strong enough to follow through? I pressed my fingers to my jaw, feeling the ridge where the bone had healed. The doctors had said that bone often grows back stronger at the break point. Perhaps the same was true of the human spirit. Friday morning arrived with a surreal sense of calm. I made breakfast for my parents, scrambled eggs and toast, playing the role of dutiful daughter one final time. Mom reminded me about the leftovers in the fridge, the emergency numbers on the kitchen bulletin board. Dad barely acknowledged me, focused on packing the car and getting on the road. I stood in the driveway waving as they backed out. Mom waved back. Dad did not look in my direction. As their car disappeared around the corner, I allowed myself a single moment of stillness of acknowledgement. Then I turned and walked back into the house that had been my prison for 18 years. It was time to set myself free. The moment the sound of my parents' car faded, I sprung into action. I had rehearsed this sequence countless times in my mind, but executing it brought a rush of adrenaline I had not anticipated. First, I did a final sweep of the house, retrieving items I had strategically hidden over the past weeks. From behind the water heater in the basement, I collected the manila envelope containing copies of financial documents I had gathered. From the air vent in my bedroom, I retrieved my journal and the small collection of family photographs I wanted to keep. From the tampon box in the bathroom, I took the flash drive containing scanned copies of all my evidence. I packed these items along with a few cherished possessions into my school backpack. Everything else, all the accumulated detritus of my childhood, I left behind. Clothes, books, the cheap jewelry Mom had given me for birthdays, the sports trophies Dad had insisted I compete for. None of it mattered now. Zoe arrived at exactly 9:30 as planned. Her familiar blue sedan pulled into the driveway, and for the first time that morning, I felt a flicker of emotion break through my methodical focus. She stepped out of the car, her face a mixture of concern and determination, and wrapped me in a careful hug. "You okay?" she asked, pulling back to study my face. "Not yet," I replied honestly, "but I will be." We drove first to Derek's house, where he was waiting with the duffel bag I had gradually filled over the past month. He loaded it into Zoe's trunk without asking questions, then gave me an awkward side hug. "I put some snacks in there," he said. "And a new phone charger. Just, road trip essentials." His attempt at normalcy nearly undid me. These two people who had respected my boundaries even when they suspected something was wrong were now risking my parents' anger to help me escape. The depth of that friendship was something I was only beginning to understand. Our next stop was Mrs. Thompson's office at the high school. Though it was summer break, she had arranged to meet us there using her administrative access to print my final transcript and gather my graduation materials. When we arrived, she was waiting with a thick envelope and a determined expression. "Your diploma will be mailed to your new address once it is processed," she explained, handing me the envelope. "This contains unofficial transcripts and verification of completion. I have also included reference letters from myself and 3 of your teachers." Her efficiency was a comfort, a reminder that there were adults in the world who used their authority to protect rather than control. I thanked her, adding her paperwork to my growing collection of documentation. By 11, we reached the most critical stop, the county courthouse. Julia met us outside, professional, in a simple blazer, her presence immediately steadying. Inside, she guided me through the process of formally filing for the temporary restraining order. The clerk behind the desk remained expressionless as I submitted my evidence and signed the required forms, but her eyes lingered on the photographs of my wired jaw. "The judge will review this immediately," she assured us. "Given the evidence, I anticipate approval within the hour." While we waited, Julia walked me through the next steps again. The order would be approved, the police would be notified, my parents would be served upon their return home Sunday evening. There would be a hearing within 10 days which I would need to attend. After that, a permanent order could be established. "Are you absolutely certain you want to go forward with this?" Julia asked quietly. "Once the police serve them, there is no going back." I thought about that question, turning it over carefully in my mind. Was I certain? The girl I had been 6 weeks ago, the one who kept her head down and absorbed pain like it was her birthright, would have hesitated. But I was no longer that girl. "Yes," I said simply. "I am certain." The restraining order was approved just after noon. Julia requested copies, one for me to keep with me at all times, others for the school, my workplace, and the shelter where I would be staying. Each copy represented a shield, a legal acknowledgement that my fear was valid, my safety paramount. By 1:30, we were on our way to the domestic violence shelter in Cedar Falls, a 40-minute drive from my hometown. Zoe insisted on driving me herself, though Julia had offered. The shelter address was confidential, so Julia provided directions at each turn, guiding us through unfamiliar neighborhoods until we reached an unremarkable building with security cameras and a buzzer system at the entrance. The shelter coordinator, a woman named Teresa with silver-streaked hair and steady hands, welcomed me without fuss. She showed me to a small but clean room with twin beds. "You will have this to yourself for now," she explained. "Meals are at 7, noon, and 6. Curfew is 10. We have group sessions every evening, at 8. Attendance is optional, but encouraged." The simplicity of these instructions, the clear boundaries and expectations, felt like a luxury after years of navigating my father's unpredictable rules and shifting moods. I unpacked the few items I had brought, arranging them carefully in the provided dresser, establishing this temporary space as my own. Zoe stayed until she absolutely had to leave for her evening shift at the movie theater. Her departure was harder than I had expected. She represented my last connection to the life I was leaving behind, the only witness to this transformation besides the professionals who were now involved. "I will call you tomorrow," she promised, hugging me tightly. "And anytime, day or night, if you need me. You are the strongest person I know, Paige." After she left, the reality of what I had done began to settle around me. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the silence, the absence of tension, the strange luxury of safety. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to cry quiet tears that carried away some of the fear I had been holding. That evening, I joined 5 other women for the group session. Their stories varied in detail but shared common threads: manipulation, isolation, Escalation of abuse. Some had children with them, sleepy-eyed little ones who played quietly with donated toys in the corner. I mostly listened, not ready to share my own story yet, but drawing strength from their resilience, their matter-of-fact discussions of restraining orders and custody arrangements and job applications. Later, alone in my room, I checked my new prepaid phone, obsessively half expecting missed calls from my parents' accusations, threats. But there was nothing. They were still away, still unaware that I had slipped from their grasp. I wondered what they would do when they returned to an empty house. Would they be worried, angry? Would they immediately suspect I had taken legal action, or would they assume I had simply run away? I tried to imagine my father's face when the police arrived with the restraining order. Would there be a flash of remorse, of shame, or only the rage I had come to expect? I could picture my mother more clearly, her initial shock, giving way to denial, to self-justification, to the narrative she would craft for neighbors and family about her ungrateful, troubled daughter. Saturday morning brought a call from Marjorie Lewis, my attorney. The district attorney had reviewed my case and agreed to file criminal assault charges against my father. The police would serve these papers, along with the restraining order. "This is now a criminal matter," Marjorie explained, "which means you do not have to personally pursue it if you do not want to. The state will prosecute on your behalf." The implications of this took a moment to sink in. My father would be arrested. There would be a mugshot, fingerprints, a court date. The private violence that had shaped my life would become a matter of public record. The thought was both terrifying and strangely liberating. That afternoon, I had my phone interview with Northern State University. Teresa allowed me to use her private office, a small space with a desk and filing cabinets and a window that looked out on a flowering dogwood tree. I sat up straight, took deep breaths, and dialed the number with steady fingers. The interview lasted 30 minutes. The scholarship committee asked about my academic interests, my career goals, my extracurricular activities. I spoke confidently about my passion for psychology, my interest in trauma research, my volunteer work at the public library. I did not mention my broken jaw or my current residence in a shelter. Those parts of my story belonged to me to share only when and if I chose to. When the call ended, I sat for a moment, savoring what had just happened. I had spoken articulately, passionately, without fear of repercussion. I had advocated for myself, claimed my achievements, without minimizing them. It was a small victory, but significant. As Saturday turned to Sunday, my anxiety began to build again. My parents would be returning home that evening. The police would be waiting. By tomorrow, everything would be different. Teresa must have noticed my increasing tension during the day because she sat with me after dinner, offering practical advice from her decades of working with domestic violence survivors. "The first 72 hours after separation are the most dangerous," she said frankly. "That is why you are here behind secure doors with people who understand the risks. Your legal preparations have been excellent, but I want you to be mentally prepared as well." She explained that my parents might try to contact me through friends, through school officials, through any connection they could identify. They might alternate between threats and pleas, between anger and apparent remorse. They might attempt to manipulate mutual acquaintances to spin the story in their favor, to paint me as mentally unstable or ungrateful. "None of this reflects on you or your decisions," she emphasized. "It is predictable behavior from people who are losing control. The most important thing to remember is that you do not owe them a response. You do not owe them your attention. You do not owe them forgiveness." That night, I lay awake watching the digital clock tick toward midnight. Somewhere in the house I would never again call home, my parents were being confronted with the consequences of their actions. Papers were being served. Explanations were being demanded. The secret violence of our family was being dragged into the light. I touched the ridge along my jawline again, tracing the place where I had been broken. The bone had healed. Different now, changed by the trauma, but whole again. Stronger perhaps than before. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The hearing, potential criminal proceedings, decisions about college and housing, and financial independence. But for now, in this moment, I had done something many never managed to do. I had broken the cycle. I had chosen myself. I had found my voice even when my jaw was wired shut. And no one would ever silence me again. Monday morning brought the news I had been both expecting and dreading. Julia called early, her voice carefully professional as she relayed the information. Your parents were served with the restraining order last night at approximately 8:15, she reported. Your father became combative with the officers and was taken into custody for interfering with the service of legal documents. He has been released this morning on his own recognizance but has been formally charged with felony assault based on your medical records and statement. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone pressed to my ear, trying to process these developments. The abstract legal strategy I had been building for weeks had transformed overnight into concrete reality. My father had spent the night in jail. My mother was alone in the house, facing the wreckage of the family narrative she had helped maintain for so many years. What happens next? I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. There will be a hearing for the permanent restraining order on Thursday at 2, Julia explained. You will need to appear and testify. Your father is legally prohibited from coming within 500 feet of you, your school, or your workplace until then. After the hearing, the judge will decide whether to make the order permanent, which would extend the protection for 1 to 5 years. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparations. Marjorie, my attorney, came to the shelter to help me prepare for the hearing, running through likely questions, practicing my responses. Teresa arranged for a volunteer to take me shopping for appropriate court clothes, as I had left home with only the basics. The shelter's community room became an impromptu strategy headquarters with Julia, Marjorie, and occasionally Mrs. Pertine and Timbalang Flay. Thompson gathered around the scratched wooden table, updating me on developments and adjusting plans as needed. I learned that my parents had hired an attorney, a fact that both surprised and did not surprise me. Dad had always maintained an outward appearance of respectability, of being the wronged party in any conflict. Of course he would fight. This would attempt to maintain control over the narrative even as it slipped away from him. On Wednesday evening, Zoe visited, bringing news from our small town. My disappearance and the subsequent legal actions had not gone unnoticed. Rumors were circulating, theories being formed. Some of my teachers had called her, concerned about my absence from graduation preparations. Derek's mother had seen police cars at my house Sunday night and had started asking questions. People are figuring it out, Zoe said, twisting her friendship bracelet around her wrist, a nervous habit she had had since middle school. Your dad is telling anyone who will listen that you have had some kind of mental breakdown, that you are making things up for attention. But Mrs. Winters saw the ambulance that night. She has been telling people what she heard. Mrs. Winters, our elderly neighbor, with paper-thin walls and a strong sense of justice. I made a mental note to send her a thank you card someday when all this was over. Thursday arrived with a physical weight, a heaviness in the air that matched my apprehension. Teresa helped me dress in the clothes we had purchased, simple black pants and a blue blouse that covered the still visible yellowing bruises on my upper arms. Julia arrived to drive me to the courthouse, her car, a sanctuary of calm, as she played classical music and pointed out landmarks in the unfamiliar city, normal conversation that helped settle my racing thoughts. The courthouse was imposing, all stone and columns and echoing hallways. Marjorie met us at the entrance, elegant in a gray suit, her briefcase bulging with the evidence we had so carefully compiled. She guided me to a small conference room where we would wait until the hearing began. Your parents are already here, she said quietly. They are in a separate waiting area with their attorney. You will not have to interact with them outside the courtroom, and even there will be bailiffs present at all times. The thought of seeing them again, of being in the same room after all that had happened, sent a cold wave through my body. Marjorie must have noticed because she placed a steady hand on my shoulder. You have done the hardest part already, she reminded me. Today is just about telling your truth. At precisely 2 o'clock, we were led into the courtroom. It was smaller than I had imagined from television shows, more intimate, which somehow made it more intimidating. I kept my eyes forward as we took our seats at the plaintiff's table, but I could feel their presence to my right. My parents, the people who should have protected me, now legally barred from approaching me. The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and reading glasses perched on her nose, called the court to order. She explained the purpose of the hearing, the burden of proof required, the potential outcomes. Her voice was brisk but not unkind, the voice of someone who had presided over many such cases and understood their gravity. When it was time for me to testify, I moved to the witness stand on legs that felt disconnected from my body. I swore to tell the truth, my voice sounding strange in my ears. Then Marjorie began her questions, leading me through the events of the past years, focusing particularly on the incident that had broken my jaw. As I spoke, I finally allowed myself to look at my parents. Dad sat rigid, his face flushed with suppressed anger, his hands clenched on the table before him. Mom looked smaller than I remembered, her carefully applied makeup not quite concealing the dark circles under her eyes. Neither would meet my gaze directly. Their attorney, a man in an expensive suit with an overly sympathetic smile, attempted to paint me as unstable, as prone to exaggeration, as ungrateful for all my parents had provided. He suggested that my injuries were indeed from falling downstairs, that my parents had sought immediate medical attention, that any discipline in our home had been reasonable and appropriate. If conditions were so unbearable, he asked, his voice dripping with false concern, why did you wait until you were 18 to leave? Why not report these alleged abuses years ago? It was the question I had anticipated, the one Marjorie and I had practiced. But in that moment, facing the man who was being paid to discredit my lived experience, my carefully rehearsed answer fell away. Instead, I spoke from my heart. Because I was a child, I said simply. A child who was taught that love and pain go hand in hand. A child who believed that if I could just be better, quieter, more perfect, the hurt would stop. A child who had nowhere to go, and no one who would believe me over the respectable adults in the room. I paused, gathering my thoughts. I did not leave when I turned 18. I left when I realized that I deserved better. When I found people who helped me understand that families are not supposed to break you. When I finally believed that I was worth saving. The courtroom was silent when I finished speaking. The judge studied me over her reading glasses, her expression unreadable. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her stenotype machine. Even my father's attorney seemed momentarily at a loss for words. When it was my parents' turn to testify, I braced myself for denials, for character assassination, for the familiar gaslighting that had shaped my understanding of reality for so long. Dad took the stand first, his testimony a masterclass in selective memory and righteous indignation. He portrayed himself as a hard-working father doing his best with a difficult, rebellious child. He described the night of my injury as a regrettable accident, the result of my own carelessness. But something had shifted in the room. His performance, which might once have seemed convincing now, rang hollow against the evidence Marjorie had presented. The X-rays of my broken jaw. The timeline of escalating incidents. The recordings of his threats after I returned from the hospital. When Mom took the stand, I expected the same unified front they had always presented. Instead, I witnessed something I had never seen before, a crack in the facade. Her testimony began as I had anticipated, supporting Dad's version of events, minimizing the violence, reframing their actions as necessary discipline. But when questioned directly about the night my jaw was broken, about whether she had sought help or intervention, she faltered. I should have done something, she said quietly, almost to herself. I knew it was wrong. Dad's head snapped up, his glare boring into her, but the words had already been spoken, entered into the record, impossible to retract. After 3 hours of testimony and evidence, the judge called a brief recess to review all materials before making her decision. Marjorie led me back to the small conference room where Julia was waiting with bottles of water and reassuring smiles. You did beautifully, Marjorie said. Absolutely beautifully. When we returned to the courtroom 30 minutes later, the atmosphere had shifted subtly. The judge's expression was resolute as she delivered her ruling. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony presented, I find clear and convincing evidence of domestic abuse as defined by state law, she stated. The temporary restraining order is hereby extended for a period of 3 years, prohibiting the respondents from any contact with the petitioner, direct or indirect, and barring them from coming within 500 feet of her person, residence, educational institution, or place of employment. She continued, outlining additional provisions. My parents would be required to surrender any firearms to the sheriff's department. They would be prohibited from attempting to contact me through third parties. Any violation would result in immediate arrest. Furthermore, she added, removing her reading glasses, I am referring this case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. The evidence presented today strongly supports charges of felony assault and child endangerment. The gavel fell with a decisive crack. Just like that, it was done. The legal system, which I had feared would fail me as so many institutions had before, had recognized my truth, had declared it valid and worthy of protection. Outside the courtroom in the marble hallway with its echoing acoustics, Marjorie and Julia flanked me like sentinels as we made our way toward the exit. I heard my name called, my father's voice desperate and angry. I did not turn, did not acknowledge. The court security officer stepped between us, reminding him firmly of the terms of the restraining order. That evening, back at the shelter, I sat in the garden behind the building, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Teresa brought me a cup of tea and sat beside me on the wooden bench. "The first hearing is the hardest," she said. "It gets easier from here." I wasn't entirely sure I believed her. The criminal case was still pending. There would be more testimony, more confrontations, more public airing of private pain, but I had survived today. Had spoken my truth and been heard. It was more than I had dared hope for just weeks ago when my jaw was wired shut and my future seemed impossibly bleak. As darkness fell, I checked my new phone. There were messages from Zoe and Derek, from Mrs. Thompson, and my art teacher, Mr. Ramirez, all sending support and good wishes. There was an email from Northern State University confirming my scholarship and housing assignment for the fall semester. There was a text from a number I did not recognize, which turned out to be from Mrs. Winters, our neighbor, who had somehow obtained my contact information. "I always knew you were strong," she had written. "Proud of you, sweetheart." I read the messages again and again, these affirmations from people who saw me clearly, who valued me not for my obedience or silence, but for my courage and resilience. This, I realized, was what actual support felt like, what healthy relationships offered, what I had been missing all along. The path ahead was still uncertain, full of practical challenges and emotional landmines, but I was no longer walking it alone, no longer convinced that I deserved the pain inflicted upon me. For the first time in my memory, I felt something that took me a moment to identify. It was hope. Fragile and tentative, but unmistakably real. Summer unfolded with a rhythm entirely different from any I had known before. The domestic violence shelter became a temporary home, a place of safety and structure as I navigated the aftermath of my escape. The criminal case against my father proceeded with methodical precision. He was indicted on charges of felony assault and domestic battery, the evidence I had gathered proving invaluable to the prosecution. In July, facing the weight of the evidence against him, Dad agreed to a plea deal: 18 months in state prison, 5 years of probation, afterward mandatory anger management and substance abuse treatment. It was less than he deserved, perhaps, but it meant I would not have to testify in a criminal trial, would not have to relive the trauma in yet another public forum. Mom's legal situation resolved differently. She was charged as an accessory, but given her testimony at the restraining order hearing and her subsequent cooperation with prosecutors, she received a suspended sentence and probation. She moved in with her sister in another town, her carefully constructed social standing in our community irreparably damaged. 2 weeks after Dad's sentencing, I received a letter from her forwarded through Marjorie to maintain the protection of the restraining order. The pages were filled with a strange mixture of apology and justification, of genuine remorse and ingrained defensiveness. "I failed you as a mother," she wrote near the end. "I was so afraid of him that I forgot to be afraid for you. I know you may never forgive me, but I hope someday you might let me try to make amends." I read the letter several times, searching my heart for a response. The anger I felt toward her was different from what I felt for my father, more complicated, tinged with a grief for what might have been if she had found her courage sooner. I decided not to respond immediately, to give myself permission to process my feelings without the pressure of her expectations. August arrived with practical considerations that helped distract from the emotional complexities. Northern State University confirmed my housing assignment in a dormitory on the east side of campus. My scholarship paperwork was processed, books and tuition covered for the upcoming academic year. The shelter's maximum stay period was approaching, necessitating decisions about transitional housing. With Julia's help, I secured a small studio apartment near campus, available for move-in on August 15th. The security deposit came from a victim's compensation fund, and 3 months' rent was covered by an emergency grant for displaced students. It was tiny, just a single room with a kitchenette and bathroom, but it would be mine alone, a space where I could heal and grow without fear. Moving day arrived with unexpected emotions. The shelter staff gathered to help me load my few possessions into Julia's car, presenting me with a handmade quilt as a going-away gift. Teresa hugged me tightly, slipping a business card into my hand. "My personal number is on the back," she said. "Day or night if you need anything at all." The studio apartment was on the third floor of an older building with high ceilings and worn wooden floors. The previous tenant had left behind a desk and bookshelf, which Julia helped me position near the window overlooking a small park. Zoe and Derek arrived with housewarming gifts, a set of dishes from Zoe, a small microwave from Derek's family. By evening, the space had begun to feel like home. My clothes hung neatly in the closet. My new laptop, purchased with scholarship funds, sat on the desk. The quilt from the shelter staff brightened the narrow bed. It was sparse by most standards, but to me it represented abundance, freedom, possibility. The university term began with orientation week, a whirlwind of campus tours and informational sessions and awkward social mixers. I met my academic advisor, a psychology professor named Dr. Elaine Bennett, who took immediate interest in my goal of studying trauma and resilience. She helped me finalize my course schedule and connected me with the university's counseling center, where I would continue the therapy I had begun at the shelter. My roommate from the shelter, a fellow psychology major named Taylor, quickly became a friend and study partner. We shared notes from our introduction to psychology class and started a Friday movie night tradition in my tiny apartment. Her matter-of-fact approach to her own history of domestic violence helped normalize my experiences, making them feel less isolating, less defining. October brought an unexpected development. Dad's attorney contacted Marjorie about arranging a supervised visit at the prison. He claimed Dad was doing well in his treatment programs and wanted to apologize in person. Marjorie relayed the request without pressure, making it clear that my restraining order gave me the right to decline. After much consideration and several intense therapy sessions, I decided to go. Not for his benefit, but for my own. To see for myself that the man who had loomed so large in my nightmares was just that, a man. Flawed, damaged, dangerous still in some ways, but no longer holding power over my daily existence. The prison visiting room was stark and institutional, with bolted-down furniture and watchful guards. Dad looked different, thinner, the prison jumpsuit hanging loose on his frame. When I sat across from him, maintaining careful distance, I saw something I had rarely witnessed before: uncertainty in his eyes. He had prepared a speech, that much was obvious. Words about regret and alcohol and his own childhood traumas. Some of it might even have been genuine. I listened without interrupting, studying the face that had once been the center of my universe, measuring my own emotional response. When he finished, there was an expectant silence. He wanted absolution, I realized. Wanted me to say I forgave him, that we could rebuild some kind of relationship when he was released, that the slate could be wiped clean. "I hope your treatment helps you," I said finally, my voice steady. "I hope you find peace with yourself someday. But I did not come here to offer forgiveness. I came to tell you that I am building a life without you in it, a good life, and I wanted you to know that your power over me ended the day I walked out that door." His face flushed, a familiar sign of rising anger, but here there were consequences for losing control. He took a deep breath, visibly struggling to maintain composure. "You are still my daughter," he said, an edge of desperation in his voice. "Biology made me your daughter," I replied, "but it is my choice whether to be your victim, and I choose not to be." I stood, then nodding to the guard that I was finished. As I walked away, I felt a weight lifting, a finality to this chapter of my life. I would probably see him again someday at a parole hearing or through legal proceedings, but I had said what I needed to say, had reclaimed the narrative on my own terms. The months that followed brought challenges and triumphs in equal measure. There were nights when nightmares woke me, when the sound of raised voices in the hallway sent my heart racing. There were days when the simplicity of making decisions without fear of repercussion felt overwhelming, the freedom almost too vast to navigate. But there were beautiful moments too. Earning an A on my first college paper, being invited to join a research project on resilience factors in trauma survivors. Celebrating Thanksgiving at Zoe's family home, where her parents treated me with a casual kindness that brought tears to my eyes. By the spring semester, I had found my rhythm. My grades were excellent, my circle of friends small but supportive. I joined a campus advocacy group for domestic violence awareness, eventually sharing parts of my story at a Take Back the Night rally. Speaking publicly about my experience was terrifying, but the faces in the audience, some nodding in recognition, others listening with compassionate attention, reminded me that personal pain can become purposeful when shared to help others. 1 year after the day my jaw was broken, I stood before the mirror in my apartment studying my reflection. The physical evidence had long since healed the bone, knitted back together stronger at the break point. The emotional healing was more complex, less linear a process, rather than an event. But I recognized the young woman looking back at me now, saw the clarity in her eyes, the quiet confidence in her posture. I touched the spot along my jawline where the fracture had been a ritual that had become less about remembering the pain and more about honoring the strength that had emerged from it. Then I picked up my psychology textbook and headed to class, stepping out into the spring sunshine into the life I had fought so hard to claim. That evening, as I worked on a paper for my developmental psychology class, an email notification appeared on my screen. It was from a high school junior in a neighboring town who had heard me speak at the rally. She described a home situation frighteningly similar to what mine had been asked for advice about resources, about how to plan an exit, about whether there was really life on the other side of abuse. I set aside my homework and wrote back immediately, providing links to the same resources that had helped me, offering to connect her with Julia, emphasizing that she deserved safety and respect. As I typed, I realized that the circle had come full circle. Just as Sarah from the online forum had once extended a lifeline to me, I was now able to do the same for someone else. That night, I added a new entry to the journal I had kept since leaving home. Not a record of abuse this time, but a reflection on healing, on the power of broken things to become whole again in new configurations. On the way, trauma can, with proper care and support, transform into wisdom and compassion. The jaw they broke has learned to speak again, I wrote. And what it says now is, you are worthy, you are strong. You are not defined by what was done to you, but by what you choose to do with your one wild and precious life. If you are watching this and recognize your own story and mine, know that you are not alone. There are people waiting to help you find your voice, your strength, your path to safety. Drop a comment below if you have ever had to rebuild your life from scratch, or if you are still finding the courage to take that first step. Like and subscribe if this story reminded you of your own resilience. Share it with someone who might need to hear that broken bones and broken spirits can both heal stronger than before. Thank you for bearing witness to my journey, and remember, your story is not over yet. The best chapters may still be waiting to be written.